Welcome to the Cumbria Chamber of Commerce podcast, your weekly update of business news and issues from around Cumbria. Find out how we support new business and help existing businesses to grow and flourish at cumbriachamber.co.uk. Now here's the Chamber's Business Engagement Manager, Julian Whittle, with this week's episode.
Hello, I'm here with Steve Wilkinson, the newly appointed Manufacturing Advisor with Cumbria Manufacturing Service. And we're going to talk about the help and advice that's available to manufacturing businesses through the Chamber's Cumbria Business Growth Hub. Steve, explain what Cumbria Manufacturing Service is and what is its purpose?
Well, Julian, it's about supporting Cumbria's manufacturing SME community in various ways. That can be basic help and advice, it can be diagnosing some very specific problems or some quite general problems, and it's about giving companies a leg up and plugging the gaps of expertise, which is quite often evident in many SMEs. So it might be that a particular organisation has a gap of specialism or capability in design or prototyping, for instance. We can help plug that gap, and we can offer some funding to help de-risk and take the sting out of what can sometimes be expensive bills. Okay,
well, I think we'll come on to that in a minute, but what does your role as a manufacturing advisor, what does that involve? What services do you offer?
Essentially, it's going out, meeting companies on site, understanding where they're at now, what the problems are, where they want to be in the short term and the mid term, and what we can do to help them get there and overcome some of those barriers. Some are small barriers, some are more significant.
Okay. Can you give us some examples then of businesses that you've worked with, not necessarily you personally, but Cumbria Manufacturing Services work with, and how you've been able to help them?
There's been various, and of all shapes and sizes. There's been quite a few projects that we've undertaken on design and prototyping and testing. We've also helped companies overcome issues with management systems which they may need in order to be able to operate in specific supply chains. We've helped them with sales and marketing strategies, for instance. Quite often manufacturers are extremely good at manufacturing, but not always great at the sort of commercialisation aspect. We can help with that.
And are you able to signpost them to other sources of help? I mean, for example, they're looking to start exporting, or maybe they're looking for finance and they're struggling a bit.
Indeed, I mean that's probably one of the greatest benefits of working in this business support community, that it is relatively well networked, and just because I'm coming looking at a specific manufacturing issue, that doesn't mean my assistance starts and stops there. We can look to bring in other specialists, as you say, export, finance, supply chain initiatives, which all add value and all help the company move forward and progress.
Now, you said at the start that you work with SMEs, so obviously that presumably excludes larger businesses, but are there any other exclusions, or can virtually any manufacturing business approach it?
There are a couple of exclusions. One's a sectoral exclusion, which is nuclear. Any companies that are primarily working in that sector, regrettably, we can't support because there are other specialist programs for them. And it's larger companies, as you alluded to, which are over 250 employees or of a certain turnover value. So generally speaking, they're a rarity, and we don't come across them too much. Quite often though, we might work with them in the sense of working with their supply chain, which helps a multitude of clients all at once.
Okay. What grants are available then to manufacturers, and what purposes can they be used for?
Through the new fund, there's a number of grants available, primarily for subsidising the cost of specialists. So as I said, your average manufacturing SME doesn't always have the ability to tap into some niche expertise that it really needs to progress. So we can help source that specialism and then we can help take the sting out of that bill by funding that to the tune of about 36%. Quite a specific intervention.
Is there a ceiling on the amount as well, or is it 36% of whatever?
We're looking at, on average, projects around the 15k mark, but as you suggest, we're sort of flexible on that because they're not all going to come in at that sort of money. Equally, there is a small capital pot which is available, which can be quite useful for companies to be able to buy a piece of equipment, and that's funded at 50%.
Okay. Now, presumably, you can help businesses through the process of applying for a grant, because I know from talking to businesses sometimes they get put off because they think, oh, it's going to be an onerous series of hoops they've got to jump through. But presumably, it's not that difficult.
It isn't. It certainly isn't if I'm doing it every day. So I can help with the. I can help with the numbers, with the questions, and it's not too much of an onerous task at all. And relatively speaking, it's fairly simplistic, and I can help cross the T's, dot the I's, and take some of the pain out of that. So nobody should be not applying based on the fact that they think it's going to be tricky.
Fair enough. So what's your background, Steve? What were you doing before you took up the role with the Cumbria Manufacturing Service?
Immediately before, I was working with an organisation, a fast-growing manufacturer. We were making temperature-controlled vehicles. So I was with that company for about 3.5 years, and that was a fast-growing company, and I headed up their operations in Lancashire. Prior to that, I was working with what was called the Manufacturing Advisory Service, or MAS, as some of your manufacturing SMEs will probably know and remember.
Yeah, that's been wound up, hasn't it?
It has, unfortunately, and it was a genuinely good a good scheme with a solid network of specialists in there. So yeah, it was sad to see that go, but things move on. And in essence, what we're trying to do with Cumbria Manufacturing Service is broadly based on what MAS was doing. So there are a lot of similarities.
And in your experience, what are the most common barriers to growth faced by manufacturing businesses? And then secondly, how can you help businesses overcome them?
I often find that some of the biggest barriers that companies have got, or the root causes of some of the symptoms, are often quite simple things, and a fresh pair of eyes can often identify them quite quickly, and we can talk through them. And it's things that I've seen firsthand, sitting on the other side of the table, as it were, as a manufacturer, but it's also things that I see regularly with companies on a daily basis, whether it's things like structural changes, management and leadership, issues around product development and sales operational relationships, lots and lots of issues, but to be fair, quite a few seem to be common throughout the manufacturing world, and probably always will be. And I can help bring my experience to bear with those issues, and equally I can help bring in specialists who can attack them if they're deeper held problems.
Of course, boosting productivity is one of probably the top priority in the government's industrial strategy. It's actually arguably even more important in Cumbria, simply because our working age population is shrinking. More people are retiring than there are young people joining the workforce. So businesses here are having to be quite innovative and find ways of doing more with fewer people. Can you help manufacturers to boost productivity?
Yes, we certainly can, and at different levels. And businesses all over are having that same issue of having to do more with less, or the same with less, essentially. But as you say, Cumbria has maybe an added magnitude to that problem with its population issue. There's many ways of attacking that, and some of the automation tools, some of the automation tools that are available now, which can help take some of the mundane away and help redeploy people into more productive roles is quite enlightening, and we're trying to bring some of that good practice that we see in some of the more progressive companies, maybe some of the bigger companies, and try and bring that to bear with some of the smaller companies, and just sowing the seeds of what's possible, and not necessarily at any great cost.
We don't seem to be able to produce a podcast these days without mentioning Brexit. I mean, obviously it is a hot topic for businesses at the moment. Are you able to help manufacturers prepare for various Brexit scenarios?
The number one question. It's a difficult challenge for everybody because of the great unknown. And I know those are obvious statements. And what we've been talking to our client base around is about keeping the communication channels open, essentially, between suppliers and customers, and understanding what commitments, forward commitments, can and can't be made, what's wise and what's not. And it's difficult because everybody's different, with lots of different contractual arrangements in place. I think some of the biggest challenges are with food importers and exporters around perishables, and what we have been able to do in some areas is to pull people together and share experiences. They're in a non-competitive environment, but they can make each other understand what they're thinking about, what their experiences have been, and it's sometimes some great food for thought. So nothing concrete, but it's to just prepare for the worst and hope for the best, as they say.
Yeah. And finally, where can businesses find out more about Cumbria Manufacturing Service, and how can they get in touch with you?
If they look on the Cumbria Growth Hub website, then they'll see there's a page on there of all about the Cumbria Manufacturing Service.
Yep.
It gives a little bit more detail about what's on offer, who's it for, and some contact details of how to get in touch with me. But certainly by coming through the hub, that was a great first step, and then from there we'll have a chat, we'll meet up, and we'll see how we can support you.
That's right. Like I said, if anyone who just wants to ring the Growth Hub, the number's 0844 257 8450. Thanks very much, Steve, and good luck in your new role.
Thank you, Julian. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Cumbria Chamber of Commerce podcast. You can find out more about how we're supporting Cumbrian businesses at cumbriachamber.co.uk and cumbriagrowthhub.co.uk. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening, and we'll have another episode for you next week.